make it up as we go along. Okay. Oh, let me get my old water ready. Oh, this has been like 20 seconds already. I don't believe that. I don't believe it took me 20 seconds to open a bottle of water. Right. So, just give it 2 seconds for people to click the notification. Let me know I've got sound. All the good stuff. Don't want to get this wrong. We can go from there. Maybe I should check over life. Maybe I should start putting timing slots on this, so like people who watch this back later can go, oh yeah, that's hang on, YouTube Studio, yeah. It says I'm live. We'll go for that. Thank you, Dennis. I just needed one person to let me know. Thank you. All is well, Dennis. Thank you very much. And I appreciate your email the other day. And I just realized that I said I would take the spare book and I never even sent you my address. So I'm sure you've seen it, or if you've replied. It normally takes me a couple of days. I get so many messages. People asking me the family histories and surnames, and I can't reply to them all. But obviously I try and highlight messages from people like yourself and Thomas, and I ignore Philip and Owen any chance I get. Okay, so we've got this one. Let's just click it here. Okay. Right, so give it another couple of seconds. I'll give it to 21:05, and then we will just crack on. Hey, those seagulls. Maybe I should shut my window. There we go. Okay, we're just OG's live. Hello. Unfortunately, you're a Gila or Argila lost out on the vote, but that doesn't mean they won't come up. It just means I'll do them sort of next. All those suggestions will be covered at one stage. Although, I noticed that we had done the e-brewing before. I put up as a suggestion. And we've actually done the Kennelowen before. We've done the O'Neills, but we've never done their progenitor group, the Néill. So since it won out on the vote, we'll go for that. Hey, Kat. Oh, no. Poor Kat. Oh, I hope everything is okay. Obviously, from your last pet, I don't go into it. Obviously, it's your personal information, but I hope everything is okay. I couldn't, as a cat owner, cat father, I know the stresses they could put us under when they're not well. So, if you have to dip to take care of your wee baby, I understand. Besides, we're talking about the Néill anyway, which is the wrong end of the country for you. Hello, Herb Queen. How are we doing? All good. We're just waiting until a few people are here before I start picking up. So those of you that voted, this was the winner, the Néill. So we'll do the Néill tonight, and then we'll probably do I imagine we'll do the Igela or Archela, depending on your pronunciation. Confederation. The next live. I'll try and get it ready for Saturday, just in case Owen and Philip are still tied down. And we can maybe do it on Saturday. Oh, thank you, Herb Queen. That means a lot. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. Just coming in and saying hi and giving the stream a like is just more than enough. So I appreciate that a lot. Okay, so we'll dive in. Try and give as many people. Try to give people a chance to click in and I can't spend all night waiting. And I was actually on time. Well, actually, I was a minute late. I'm sorry, I was a minute late, but I was on time ish. Okay, it's because I've got Owen and Philip to grip me. So yeah, like I said, the Néill is the topic today. So we'll just jump right in. So obviously, the name Néill, literally translates from Old Irish as like the descendant of the grandson of Néill, and this refers to their eponymous ancestor Néill Nógach, or he's better known as Néill's Nine Hostages. The bit cut off at the side, it's on portrait. Hang on, let me do. Oh yes, I see. Hang on, maybe if we do. This one. And it means you can see the next slides, but if I do that, won't spoil anything then. How's that in well, let me hide landscape view. Is that a bit better? Okay. Okay, it is. No, Dennis, it wasn't you. It's just the way portrait goes in portrait goes in PowerPoint. So, but there you go. So it's a bit better. Okay, right. That's right. Shock horror. These slides are done through PowerPoint. Hey, you've seen behind behind the curtain, my mastering editing. Yeah. So as I was saying, Néill Nógach, or he's better known as Néill of Nine Hostages, and he's remembered as as a formidable 4th or 5th century warlord. Had to blame it on the O'Neills. Always blame it on the O'Neills. From the dawn of like a historical era in Ireland, right up until like the late 10th century, the descendants of Néill operated basically as undisputed heavyweights of Irish politics, and they dominated the entire north half of the island. Basically, this vast sphere of influence. Traditionally it's known as the Leth Cún, or Con's half. For about half a millennium, they also held a virtual monopoly on the highly prestigious and almost mystical kingship of Tara. But really we want to look at who were the group, and really like to try to truly understand them. It's helpful to think of the Néill not just as like this single tight-knit family, but it's rather it's a hierarchical, it's a vast dynastic framework. Effectively, they're basically a really complex confederation of distinct royal branches that are use this pretense of a shared like illustrious ancestry to kind of bind themselves together and assert that sort of dominance over other regional groups. But actually, this shared identity provided them with basically a very powerful diplomatic and military network. So, effectively ensuring that their combined might was unmatched by any other single political entity in early medieval Ireland. So, I mean, it's this massive dynastic web, and it's divided into two main territorial branches: the northern Néill, who consolidate their power in Ulster, and then you've got the southern Néill, who dominated the Midlands. Um, Hello, Jason. How are we doing? It's good to see you back again. You know, and while these sort of internal factions frequently fought each other, they fought amongst themselves. They did emphasize this shared Néill identity, which ultimately, helped them maintain positions of power, and it, went on for centuries. Um, so, and it's through a combination of military might and propaganda that the Néill are able to shape the very concept of Irish kingship effectively. They are really the architects in Irish history, and this political framework. So, not to be sort of sidelined. And that's that slide. That was basically the slide for that. See, I can't see them now because I'm not not so big. Similar swallows that return to Tara every year return to my barn in western Pennsylvania. They follow me around the fields with my tractor. They knew my dad. They know me. Maybe it goes further. Well, as it crows can remember faces for 10 years. Talking about this today, actually. And they pass on information amongst murders or family groups, as a group of crows, I believe it's called. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're sharing information. They're like, that guy in that tractor. Watch out. Now, obviously, if we're gonna understand the dynasty, we first have to look at how history is recorded and remembered, because our knowledge of early medieval Ireland, kind of relies heavily on a mixture of annals, genealogies, hagiographies, and legendary origin tales. So, monastic scribes recorded the obituaries of kings and the outcomes of battles in texts like the Annals of Ulster, the Annals of Four Masters, while sort of great manuscript collections like the Book of Leinster, the Book of Ballymote, preserved their complex family trees. And according to these traditional genealogies, the Néill trace their ultimate origins back to the legendary Cataract. I can never remember how to pronounce his second Irish name, but he's better known as Con of the 100 Battles. And from Con descended the Connachta, the broad population group from which the Néill originally sprang. But the true patriarch of the dynasty is Néill Nógallach, or Néill of Nine Hostages. Shocking appeals. That's fine, mate. The medieval tales that describe Néill's origins, are less about strict historical fact. It's much more about political propaganda. So in the 11th century, the saga, The Adventure of the Sons of Echard Mucmadon, so that's Niall's father, who is king of Tara, and Echard has sons by two different women. His first wife is Mongfind, who's a captive Saxon princess, and a captive princess called Kieran, who becomes the mother of Niall. So there was a bully in the high school around here named Jimmy O'Neill. No one liked him. I mean, maybe he takes after his ancestors much more than we realize. Actually, the most famous episode for the origin tale is there to serve as justification for the Néill supremacy, because the story goes that while out on a hunting expedition, Niall and his half brothers They become thirsty and they like encounter this hideous hag guarding a well, and the hag demands a kiss in exchange for drinking water. And obviously, while his brothers kind of refuse or give her only a like this like a peck on the cheek, or Néill, embraces her and gives and kisses her, and instantly this like hag transforms into this like beautiful maiden who and reveals herself to be the sovereignty of Ireland. And like she then like makes a prophecy that because of his bold action of kissing an ugly woman, uh which is so brave, so heroic, that she makes the prophecy that because of his actions, that Niall and his descendants are destined to hold the kingship of Ireland forever. You know, uh, as he also has the famous epithet of the nine hostages, and the legends sort of claim again that he's earned this title by taking hostages from the five ancient provinces of Ireland, as well as four from across the seas, which is specifically from the Scots, the Saxons, the Franks, and the Britons. Modern historians suggest a more grounded, like historic reality. The title might actually have stemmed from Niall demanding hostages from the nine sub-kingdoms of Archella, and a confederation of tribes in Ulster. Uh, uh, I can't say, about surnames and O'Grady, O'Neills, or Bullies in school. I went to school here. They're all O'Grady's, O'Neills, Doherty's, Gallagher's, um, McAlevy's. But yeah, but obviously, like I said, to understand this, we have to understand that the traditions are carefully constructed narratives, and they're designed specifically to legitimize the Néill power. Uh, you know, Early Irish history and genealogy is in like incredibly malleable. As the Néill are growing in power, their propagandists, are projecting their triumphs back into like mythological past. They're creating a shared sort of pseudo historical identity, and they weave these tales of heroic, sometimes divinely ordained rise to prominence. So it helps absorb allied tribes into their network, and also conveniently sort of airbrushes less successful branches out of official history. Um, so, so the rise of so obviously the legends claim that they're already destined for greatness. Historical evidence suggests that the Néill actually are a branch of the Connacht. So they're originating in the west of Ireland, and from their western base, they sort of kind of embark on this ruthless but a very successful campaign of expansion into the northeast. In the Midlands, you've got the sons of Néill, such as Corpora and Fiaku. So they lead war bands to carve out new territories, and they gradually sort of wrestle control over Meath and Westmeath and Lyon, or the Leinstermen. A kind of key turning point in the southern expansion is the Battle of Droom, Durga in 516 AD. 516 AD, if I can get that word out. It's where the Néill sort of decisively sort of sees the plain of Midgip or Meath, and that's where they establish their permanent foothold in the region. But perhaps the most sort of, critical moment in the early rise of, this kind of supremacy was the Battle of Ocha in 482. I should have wrote that one down, but 482, 483. And in this battle, they defeat and kill the reigning king, King Alil Mot. And kind of from that day forward, the Irish sort of rulership passes directly to the family of Niall. and kind of permanently excludes their Western Connacht cousins from the kingship of Tara. So you've got in the north, other branches are busy conquering Ulster. So the Northern Néill are led by Niall's sons, Owen and Connell. KFC is the best instant flavor. I'll take your word for it. I'm not a big fan of American food, I've got to say. From what I've had, that's I know that America's a vast place with lots of different delicacies and ways of cooking. But I did Route 66 a few years ago, and everywhere we ate, I didn't like. Although New Mexico was lovely, actually, I give them that. But by and large, I couldn't eat your sweets. Most of your food tastes plastic. But that's just me. And like I say, I've seen some southern, putting all that shrimp in those barrels and all the flavors and the potatoes and everything they put in. It looks lovely, but your fast food is I wouldn't try it again. But yeah, Niall, sons Owen and Connell. We have real garlic and butter potatoes here. All right. We have plenty of potatoes too. It's not 1846. Yeah, so Owen and Connell, they push into Ullard, eventually sort of confining the Ullard to over, to the east side of the River Barn. And the main victory for that is in 563 at the Battle of Moyn Locher, where the Northern Néill sort of beat the Cruithne and sort of established their dominion over sort of modern day Derry and Tyrone. But the rise of the Néill was not achieved just through sort of battle alone, brute force. They are actively engaged in political engineering, and they conquered an area. They didn't always, when they did conquer an area, they didn't always displace the local population. Often they just turned existing sort of tribal groups, clans into vassal states. A prime example is actually Archela. So a confederation of tribes, they're a confederation of tribes in central Ulster, and they are subjugated and made a tributary of the Néill. And to sort of cement this dominance, the Néill used propaganda again, rewriting genealogies to sort of artificially link their subjects people or subjugated people to their own family trees, so almost ensuring that loyalty through for like a manufactured shared identity. And by the mid sort of 6th century, they were kind of fully consolidated into a powerful king, under the powerful king Dermot MacCurbel. And they established his kinship as like the kingship of Tara as the ultimate seat of power. And it was actually from Dermot that the Midland dynasties of the Néill would actually descend. So, and within just a few generations, they transformed effectively from a Western tribal branch into, undisputed sort of almost masters of the northern half of Ireland. Making you hungry. Well, I've had chicken curry tonight. Loads of it. I had about 2 bowls of it, so I am full. You can get garlic fries at the San Francisco Giants games. Could you not just get them anywhere? Put Gilroy garlic on everything. Is that real garlic? I don't know. Like I say, I'm yet to be. I'm yet to be persuaded into American fast food store. Anything that maybe isn't home cooked. I haven't had good experiences. Um, so yeah, the northern and southern Néill. So as the Néill expand their power, they grow. You know, obviously, like every group, they grow too large to operate as like a single unified sort of unit family. So by the 6th century, they'd split into two distinct geographical and political sort of groups: the Northern Néill in Ulster, the Southern Néill in Midlands. Um, so the Northern Néill claimed descent, like I said, from the three sons, Conall, Owen, and Enda. And their descendants formed the Kin'Connell, the Kin'Owen, and the what kind of became a relatively minor and obscure Kin'Enda. And for the first sort of 2 centuries of their recorded history, the Kin'Connell are the dominant masters of the north. They're based in rugged Highland sort of County Donegal, or Tyrconnell, and they were, uh, formidable, basically. A strong military sort of group, and they provide several over kings to the Néill, uh, and they have, famous connections such as Columba, can't pronounce the words, but by the late eighth century, the Kilconnell are eventually sort of eclipsed by their cousins, the Kenlowen. Yes, Americans criticize San Franciscans for eating non-processed food. People criticize people for eating non-processed foods. Americans need to come to Europe more. Um, yeah, so the 8th century, the Kilconnell are sort of eclipsed by their cousins, the Killowen. The Killowen are originally sort of ruled from Inishowen. There's a famous poem that claims they're kind of wildly ambitious. The race of Great Owen did not like to be confined. Is the line from the poem. And they aggressively expand eastwards and southwards, effectively conquering modern day Derry and Tyrone. And eventually, like I said, they subjugate the Airgilla, and they actually eventually moved their royal inauguration site from Éileach to Tullyoch. By the year sort of 800, the Kinlowen have kind of completely marginalized the Kin'Connell. Now they're the undisputed sort of masters. But the Southern Néill, their territory stretched across the Midlands from the River Shannon to the west, right to basically the Irish Sea. And just like their northern cousins, they dominate. They're dominated by, again, two competitive dynastic branches. Both of these branches claim descent from Dermot MacCurbel, the 6th century king I mentioned. The first of the powers was the Siled Slane, or the Seed of Aid Slane, and they controlled the eastern kingdoms of Brega, which sort of is like County Meath and North Dublin, South Louth. And in the 7th century, the Siled Slane are effectively the heavyweights of the Midlands. They're frequently claiming the overall kingship of the Néill. But I suppose, like so many families, they're fractured by, like so many other kinsmen, by sub-factions, warring sub-factions. Specifically, it's the kings of North, the kings of Lagora, Lagor, which kind of weakens the Siled Slane's power. You can smell Gilroy. Took the Greyhound through a few times when I was younger, post Afghanistan. uh, Pacific One, the sun says, where a lot of Irish immigrants used to live. Many still do. I didn't know that. I can never get over the size of how big family farms are in America. Um, never get it, understand it. I suppose our farms are a lot smaller here in Ireland. I'd love to know how big my granddad's farm was actually. He sold it before I was born there, so I wouldn't. Let me see. You were born in San Rafael. I don't know where that is. See, you're naming places now, and I have no idea where they are. Or I've maybe heard of them, but I still don't know where they are. I need to up my links to my understanding of geography of America. It's quite poor, if I'm honest. How were the O'Higgins? Where'd that comment just go? How did the O'Higgins tie into the? I'm guessing that was the Néill, Mr. Zeppelin. The actual the Bardic O'Higgins family are part of the southern branch of the Néill. So they're seated in Westmeath. That they're think of like they're part of the learned class, so they're much like the O'Dailys or the McNammies or stuff like that. So, but uh, they're sometimes Higgins can also be a variation of O'Hagan as well. Very rarely, but it can happen. So obviously, then you have the O'Hagans of Tullyhawk. But most O'Higgins, of the Bardic family, the one that is linked to the Néill is the Southern Néill. Talking about Cali. I've been to California. I forget I did Route 66 and I went through California. But all the tourist places, it wasn't any of the normal places where people live. I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't do it again. You should learn the migratory clusters or gales of North America, much like we once shifted around Western Europe. Unfortunately, by the time they get to, like I said, by the time they get to Americas, well, the ones that migrated in the 19th century, it's way outside my area of expertise of history. I know some of the places they landed and some of the families that did. Obviously, when you're researching family histories, they tend to. Some sources will tend to go all the way to the modern era, but like I know there were O'Driscolls on both sides of the American Civil War. Because when I researched that for that video that I was going to do, I found all the names of the O'Driscolls. Most were in the northern camp, but some were in the southern camp. So you didn't even have enough money to visit Marin County, Michael. All my money went on that trip. It was a very expensive trip. I did the whole of Route 66. It wasn't cheap. From Chicago all the way down to. Did we end up in LA? Yeah, we finished in LA. 2 weeks. It's good. I grew up in West Boston. Everyone knows Boston, especially if you're from here. um, yeah. So basically, with the fall of I'm getting sidetracked. With the fall of the Slade Sláine because of the warring sub kings, the Clan Coleman, who are based further west of the kingdom, they're in Westmeath, and their sort of headquarters, I suppose, or their sort of main point is said to have been the Loch Ennell. Um, um, there was a few sort of Cranach fortresses, or part of a grouping network of Cranogs and uh, monastic sites that they sort of sprung from. And by sort of the mid 8th century, it's about 743, there's a battle, and Clan Coleman sort of sees supremacy of the southern Néill. By the mid 8th century, it's kind of settled down, and it just kind of leaves two ultimate superpowers: the Kenloan in the north and Clan Coleman in the south. And because their power bases are separated by geography, mountains, lakes, and the vassals, the Argilla, it's very hard for either side to conquer the other. And it wouldn't be in their best interest to destroy themselves in endless war. So they kind of enter into a power sharing agreement, and it kind of sets the stage for one of the most unique political systems in medieval Europe. My eldest son is leaving tomorrow for Ireland. His second trip, he finished college in Galway. Right when the pandemic hit, he almost was stuck. Oh, well, I mean, there's worse places to get stuck, but good luck to your son. Good luck. And, I hope he has, well, if it's his second trip, I'm sure he knows what he's doing this time. But the country's great. He'll have no dramas. We tend to have I'd say a pretty safe country. Yeah. So the Néill are, like I say, the Néill kingship. It's kind of a unique system they present here. To understand, how they exercise sort of power, you've got to kind of like discard traditional ideas of European royalty. Because early medieval kingship, Irish kingship, was not a feudal system. It was where a monarch kind of possesses absolute power over the land and its laws. It's almost complex. It's really complex. It's a multi-tiered hierarchy based on clientship, military might, and prestige. At the base of the system, you've got the Rí Tuatha, or petty king, and they rule over a single kingdom or tribe. Although most historians kind of shy away from the word tribe nowadays. But above him, you'll have the Rí Ruaidhrí, or the overking of several tuas, and above him, you'll have the Rí Ruaidhrí, or I think there can also be the Rí Cochid. And they're a provincial king. So the Néill overlords, they hold the title of King of Tara, and they sit at the very sort of tip of the pyramid, and they're claiming precedence over all the other kings in Ireland. And unlike the kingdoms of England or France, the Néill don't practice primogeniture, where the crown is sort of automatically passed down from father to eldest son. Instead of the succession's governed by the system known as the Dearfina, and that's a legal family group generally comprising of about 4 generations descended from a common great grandfather. Any adult male whose father, grandfather, or great grandfather has been a king is eligible to succeed to the throne, and these sort of eligible princes are known as the Rí Domna, and it's like king material. It translates to king material. And the chosen successor, is often referred to as the Tarnished or the Tarnished. So in theory, the kingship went to whichever relative was deemed the most capable, and fitting to lead. And in reality, this system is the recipe for instability, because you'll have several branches of a dynasty claim valid right to rule, and so succession is often decided by force. If a particular branch of the family has failed to secure the kingship within 3 generations, they kind of fall out the Durfina, this sort of magic circle, and they lose their royal status. So the Néill history is filled with bitter rivals and kinslaying, and uh, as cousins and brothers sort of fight to secure the throne. To try and sort of mitigate the internal warfare, the Néill then sort of they created this sort of political compromise. So from the year 734 to until um, uh, 1002, the kingship of Towers, deliberately alternates between the two most powerful branches of the dynasty. It's a decent. You've got the Kenlowen in the north, the Clan Common in the south, and this sort of sort of convention sort of ensures, that neither half of the Néill could be permanently shut out of the kingship. And there's a lot to it with the fact that kingship itself is sort of has a lot of this quasi divine concept. So an Irish king is expected to be physically perfect, free from any blemish or disability. As the sort of prosperity of the land is directly tied to almost like the righteousness, the physical perfection of its ruler. He's viewed as being symbolically married to the sovereignty of the land itself. And because of these sort of divine sacred undertones, the new Néill king was not crowned in a church with a crown or some golden diadem. They're meant to be inaugurated in open air, at some ancestral site. And in the inauguration, the candidate would sort of stand or sit on a sacred inauguration stone, known as the Lachnarí, the flagstone of the kings. And the ceremony sort of has the chief olive or the poet, and a prominent sort of sub king. You would hand the new ruler the white rod, or is it the Slattery? And this sort of straight white rod or wand is symbolizes truth, justice. He's going to rule without tyranny, and I believe it's customary as well for in a couple of the O'Hagans would throw a shoe over the Néill king in Tyrone. There's another inauguration to do with a shoe as well, although I don't think it's thrown on him over him. So yeah, it's filled with a lot of symbolism. The Hatfields and the McCoys is what you're describing. Once inaugurated, the king's duties are, he's not a lawmaker. The Brehon judges are interpreted, would interpret the law. The Néill king is primarily a war leader and a diplomat. So his power is maintained by, conducting military circuits, demanding tribute, taking hostages from subordinate kings. I think there's some legal texts that sort of said, he's not a king if he doesn't have hostages. And he's responsible for sort of convening the Onach, these great public assemblies. There's a famous Onach where was it Tailton? Onach Tailton? Yes, where power, wealth, emphasis on the unity of the Néill are displayed to the rest of Ireland. So, but the Néill obviously held a virtual monopoly on the kingship of Tara, and they dominate the northern half of Ireland. But they obviously shared the island with, it didn't rule the whole island. They share the island with, other provincial kings. So they have to, form this sort of web of warfare, diplomacy, subjugation. So to the south you have the Lion, or the Leinstermen. You have, they basically are bitter enemies of the Néill, because the Southern Néill had carved out most of their land from the Lion. And they're frequently going into Leinster to demand submission. They're exacting heavy tributes on them. They put their own chosen candidates to rule over the province. So yeah, they're a bit of a punching bag for the Néill. You've got the Kingdom of Ullid, who effectively ruled most of the north before that, and they've been pushed out to east of the River Bann, so sort of modern day Antrim and Down. And the Néill are constantly trying to subjugate them in later centuries, and they even sort of partitioned the Ullid kingdoms among sort of rival factions to keep them weak. But they didn't conquer or expel the Airkiller, because it's a large federation of tribes. So instead of destroying them, the Néill incorporate the Airkiller into their sort of machine that they've created, and provide a lot of the sort of essential troops for the Néill campaigns. It's one of the reasons why I kind of believe that the Néill were at the Battle of Clontarf, even though it's sort of stated they didn't take part. I think they are, because there are a lot of Highland kings present at the battle. And what about the Connacht? Obviously they share, they claim shared ancestry with the Connacht, but they actually kind of distance themselves from the Western. They're like their Western cousins. Like I say, they exclude them from the kingship. But all of those are secondary to their main rivals, who are the Oanachta. The Oanachta are, the only ones who are the only true rivals of the Néill for sort of supremacy. The Munster kings often marched north to attack Tara, attack the Midlands, but the Néill had, a more cohesive, and they were more stable generally than the looser Confederation of Munster. But obviously the ultimate currency of sort of power in early medieval Ireland is the hostage. So the Néill kings often enforced treaties and guaranteed the loyalty of their subject kings by effectively demanding hostages. It's usually the sons or close relatives of the rival king to keep them in check. And alongside sort of brute force and hostage taking, they also rely heavily on strategic marriages, alliances, so marrying off their daughters to other rivals to secure their borders and dynastic interests. Like I say, you look at the warfare, you kind of you look at the alliances, you look at the political marriages, but ultimately, you know, the church ultimately sort of functions as like the vital pillar for the Néill supremacy. So to secure their power, the Néill engage in, you know, basically like marriage of church and state. So they're turning some of the most powerful monasteries in Ireland into their own personal, like scholarly wings. You know, the most famous, example of sort of intertwining church and dynasty revolves around St. Columba or Columkill. Columba's, he's not just a humble monk from nowhere. He's a royal prince of the Kenalconnell. He's, who is one of the leading branches of the North Néill. And he, in the 6th century, finds basically this monastic federation that included great houses like Derry and Durrow in Ireland, and probably the most famous of them all, Iona off the coast of Scotland. And because early Irish monasteries were organized along tribal and kin-based lines, Iona and its sort of network of daughter houses, it essentially operates as an Néill proprietary church. So for centuries after Columba's death, these powerful positions of abbot of Iona was kept exclusively within its own sort of Ken O'Connell family. And this provides the Néill with, a massive, wealthy and internationally respected ecclesiastical network that sort of is championing their dynastic interests. So while the Columban monasteries support the Néill from the west and the north, and even you have an even more ambitious alliance, which is being forged in the east with the Church of Armagh. And Armagh claimed the primacy Church of St. Patrick. He's the apostle of the Irish. And as the Néill expanded their sort of power across the northern half of Ireland, they actively sort of allied themselves with Armagh. And the relationship is entirely symbiotic. So the clerics of Armagh and Néill kings are working sort of in like tandem to boost each other's status. So Armagh wanted to be obviously recognized as the Supreme Church of Ireland, and the Néill want to be recognized as the Supreme Kings of Ireland. So monastic scholars at Armagh are and within the sort of this Columban network became effectively the propagandists of the Néill. And their hagiographies, the lives of the saints, they wrote stories showing that saints like St. Patrick, St. Columba are blessing Néill like ancestors, prophesizing, great deeds, declaring their kingship over Ireland, that it's divinely ordained by God. So the Néill exercise their authority by partnering with the church. Can we start a GoFundMe so Michael can get a 700 marker DNA test and join these Gale DNA projects? Anyone we could throw in on it. He will quickly discover new things. You don't have to get me a DNA test. I will get one. Oh, I think we said I got the Y500, although that doesn't do. Is it the 500? It's the one below the 700. I thought it shows you nothing, just your main group. I think I'm RM222. 22222. I think, if I remember rightly. I think I read it out one time. But I'm not sure. I think it's the most common Y DNA chromosome. I mean, new things that no one has ever thought of. It is your interest. It is my interest. It would. I do thoroughly look forward to seeing how much more DNA evidence changes our understanding of population groups and societies. It already debunked the invasion of the Gael myth. Um, we now know that the Gaels are effectively the native population from the Bronze Age. Um, but we also have an understanding that there are groups of people coming in from Europe and small groups like the Menapai, the German group who are settling in Leinster, move up and become part of the Airchela. We know that there's groups coming in from Scotland. These are small groups, but they have large inputs in our history. It's like $150 more for the. I'll tell you what. I'll do you a deal next live. I'll find out exactly how much it is. And I will. We'll set up something, and we'll see if we can do it. Maybe we'll do it online. Maybe we'll do it live, and we'll see what my results say, and then we can all pick apart my DNA. Find out I'm actually part of the long lost tribes of Israel, and I'm the last surviving descendant of, Khan of the 100 Battles. Be interesting though. Yeah. So, yeah, like I said, the church is working in tandem with the kingship, the Néill. And the Néill kings are helping the monasteries extract revenue, and tribute from the population, while sort of simultaneously demonstrating their own vast political reach. So, in return for their sort of heavy patronage, the Néill kings are granted this ultimate prestige of being like, buried at Sanctus, near saints, with these great monastic cities. So the Northern Néill secured royal cemetery at Armagh, and while the Southern Néill become the great patrons of the Midlands monastery of Clonmacnoise. And the Southern Néill, in fact, it's kind of immortalized in stone, isn't it? Because the Southern Néill, High King Flann Sinna, commissioned the Cross of Scriptures, Clonmacnoise, so which is still there. A monster man, even Dennis. Why would you insult me so badly? I would end the live and throw myself off a cliff. A monster man. Oh, could you imagine? I find out that I'm actually a McCarthy. Oh, the shame. Bugs me, I can't do it. My brother's not cooperative in that matter. It's such a shame. And I understand why. There's a lot of you're handing over a piece of your information to people that you don't know, don't trust. But they've already got it anyway. And trust me, if the government wants it, they can get it. And that's not just the American government, which is, sneaky beaky. All governments. So I don't see the problem in giving it away. And if they want to use my DNA and frame me for a murder, maybe I murdered Elvis Presley because they put my DNA all over that burger. Fine. If McCarthy comes up, I'd take O'Sullivan, I'd take O'Driscoll. I don't think I could take McCarthy. I couldn't take O'Neill either. Don't worry, guys. Couldn't take O'Neill. What I would my dream would be that I am from the I'm a MacDonald Levy or but I think probably I'm related to the McCartans. I think in some way. I think I'm a branch of them. Yes, in local politics, that is to call me a man of Moo instead of the man of village. I would. I do feel like I'm ending the live now. The insult. I challenge you to a duel. If I had a white glove and you were here, I would slap you across the face. Go across. The big Y is expensive. I'm chipping out on the 23andMe. I need to remember my password. If I can remember my password, I think I didn't. I do this on another live back in the day on FTDNA. It was on my old phone. I used to just have to do my thumbprint and it would just log in. But now it doesn't. Oh, yeah. So the big Y700 at the minute is 399 straight from top. But like I say, I have the Y111. I think is that the next one down. I think that's the one I have. So I've already paid sort of £200 towards it. So about halfway. But the Y111s, I wouldn't bother. If you're not going to go the full hog, I wouldn't bother because you don't really learn that much from the wire. But Kat, I wish you could. I wish you could find some cousins or something like that. Maybe just do if you could do a autosomal testing on ancestry.com, and then whichever O'Sullivans appear, as your closest relatives. But I wouldn't know enough about ancestry to know if that would work. Unfortunately. I have to reset my password. I know the names, locations, and immigration dates of my Irish and German families. I don't really need the DNA thing. I mean, the DNA thing's good because there's that gap of about 200 years where, and then you have the Industrial Revolution and time under the British Empire where families are moving out of their traditional sort of areas, rural areas, and moving into city hubs. And then you can have different O'Neills all living together, even though they're not from the same O'Neill family. So what you assume your surname is linked to, which tribal group, which is clan they're associated with, they might not actually be. I know a lot of families took a lot of myths, legends, and false information to the new world. Like I've said, from my own experience, we had a cousin who I think she's a second cousin to my dad. We'd never met her, but we met through DNA. And she was in her 80s and had spent her whole life thinking her Doyles were associated with Cork. She considered herself a Cork woman, had been over to Cork a few times, and we had to break it to her that none of our family was ever anywhere near Cork. So it was, she spent her whole life thinking that she was a Cork woman. And, I mean, she got upgraded to an Ulster woman, so she must have been chuffed. And I was half joking. Family Walsh myth assumes Kilkenny, turns out DNA is southwest of Ireland. Yeah, I mean Walsh is you. The problem with Walsh is automatically you aren't from a single family because this it's a bit like Doyle. It's the Smith surname of Ireland. Has so many origin points. I think it's more important that families like Doyle, Walsh, White, Brown, etc. do these tests anyway, because it just helps build a better picture. Like learning your royalty going from Munster to Ulster. Exactly. Couldn't agree more. So when we think of the Néill warfare, you kind of have to set aside massive pitched battles. These total wars of like annihilation. So in medieval Ireland, as many of you aware, warfare is primarily like an economic and political tool. So the preferred military tactics are crick or hit and run cattle raids. So the objective is rarely to actually slaughter the enemy population, because I guess in an underpopulated country, land is considered to be of little value without people working it. If you don't have the people to work it, what's the point in having the land? So it's the same whenever I sort of argue against the mass slaughter of the Hebrides Islands by the Vikings, that this myth sort of persists, but it doesn't make economic sense to do so. So, and also even in locations where we can prove massacres happen, it's very rare that, if ever at all, that an entire population is wiped. People escape every time. But the Néill king would invade a rival territory. They'd seize most of the valuable currency, which is the livestock. They'd burn the crops, take high status hostages, and by causing sort of economic hardship and devastation, they forced the rival kings into political submission. How crazy ruined that woman's life. Yeah, any Cork person would feel that would be true. So yeah, so also, like, how did the Néill raise army? So the core of the Néill military force is from the Loch Taig. The permanent troops of the royal household. These are elite, well-equipped warriors, cavalrymen who lived on the king's land and acted as sort of bodyguards, and they kind of constantly patrol. They hold their regions. They'll patrol the borders against enemy incursions. They'll accompany the king, because kings didn't sit in like feudal kings in one location. They were constantly moving around their kingdom. But whenever a major campaign or invasion is required, the king calls a general hosting, or a levy, and the larger forces drawn from freemen from their own territory, as well as the troops provided by subjugated vassal kings. So you effectively have citizen soldiers who are essentially farmers, who do need to return to their lands. So they can only be kept in the field for short periods of time, just a few weeks usually. So because of these sort of logistical limitations, you kind of go into circuit warfare. You just so where you march from province to province, demanding hostages and tribute, to visually enforce supremacy. And then if the subordinate king submitted, he was usually left in power as a vassal, and his lands, with his lands ravaged as well. So it's a persistent grinding military pressure, so you push, and that's how you systematically push, your borders outwards over centuries. So you'd have in the Midlands a Southern Néill continuously sort of battering the lion, the Leinstermen. to sort of secure and expand that hold on the sort of their lands in Meath, Midger, and Brega. Um, and the Kinlowen, it's continuously against the Ullid, the Archela. But obviously, as the centuries sort of progress, the scale and kind of brutality of warfare does intensify. By the 10th and 11th centuries, campaigns became much more ambitious. You fought over wider geographical areas. That traditional sort of cattle raiding had evolved into that large scale taking of human captives for slave trade. It's only a practice adopted and amplified following the Vikings. And they're able to sustain these longer wars. The Néill kings increasingly rely on hired mercenary bands, and they begin deploying naval strategies. Like High King Donnelly Néill, is said to have transported fleets of ships overland to reach, surprise attacks across inland lakes, river systems, which obviously takes a lot of organization. I have more Viking side to me, really. Irish is secondary. Irish is never secondary. You take that back, Cat. And talking about the Vikings, obviously it was the arrival of the Vikings that sort of radically altered the political and physical landscape of Ireland. You got the first raids sort of happening on the coast in 795, but by 830s, 840s, these Norsemen have moved on from brief hit and run attacks to sort of establishing these permanent naval encampments known as long forts, like Dublin. It is kind of tempting to view the period as sort of straightforward war of national defense, with the Irish united against a foreign pagan invader, but the reality is it's much more layered and complex, because early medieval Ireland, lacked a centralized government. And as stated here, the Vikings simply became another piece of the chessboard of Irish dynastic politics. So the Néill over kings, they frequently formed alliances with Viking leaders or hired Norse-Irish mercenaries, the Gaul Gael, to gain that edge over the native rivals. And occasionally they cemented these alliances with intermarriage. And despite these sort of alliances of convenience, kings, were also responsible for some of the more famous victories against the Vikings. During the mid-9th century, the Southern Néill king Maelshocknall I, he captured the Viking warlord Turgus in 845 and said to have drowned him in Lochaul. In the north, Kinlowen, Aid Finleth he launches a campaign in 866, and he destroys all the Viking strongholds on the northern coast of the Kinlowen and the Dalnaraja territories. But this actually had more unintended consequences, long-term consequences, because by driving out the Norse, the Northern Néill kind of denied themselves that economic benefit. The wealthy trading towns that the Vikings were establishing didn't take in Ulster. So Ulster kind of, for a little while, doesn't reap as much economic benefit from dealing with the Vikings. The 10th century is kind of the greatest Viking threat. You've got Ivar. After he's temporarily expelled from Dublin, the dynasty then returns in 919, and the Northern Néill king, now Glundov, he assembles a massive coalition of both Norsemen and the Southern Néill, to drive them out of Dublin, and they clash at the Battle of Island Bridge, which ends up as a complete disaster for the Irish. The Néill are crushed, and now Gundov, along with I think it's 5 of the Irish kings, are slaughtered in the battlefield. And Niall's death is eventually avenged by some Murtagh MacNeill, who's known as Murtagh of the Leather Cloaks, and Murtagh becomes said to become the scourge of the Vikings in the north, relentlessly attacking their bases at like Carlingford and Lough Neagh. And he's immortalized as like the Hector of the Western world in the annals. Before he dies against the Dublin Vikings near Ardee in 943. The turning point for the Néill dominance over the Vikings really comes under the Southern Néill High King Néill II in 980. He defeats the Dublin Vikings at the Battle of Tara, and then following this victory, he sort of besieges Dublin and forces the Norsemen to release all the Irish hostages and slaves. Again, another event celebrated in the annals. I think it's mentioned as the end of the Babylonian captivity of Ireland. So by the end of the 10th century, the military power of the Viking towns is kind of broken. They're reduced to sort of wealthy subordinate city-states. They're forced to pay tribute to powerful Irish kings. But, the economic and military innovations introduced by the Vikings changed the rules of Irish power, and they set the stage for new challenges to the Néill. Murtagh Breen, where is he? He wasn't born yet. Well, he might have been born. 1014. Could have been born. He was quite old at the Battle of... oh, no, I'm thinking of Murtagh. Yeah, but Murtagh Breen is part of the Breen, so he's Thomond, around here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, above Limerick on that map. So the 9th and 10th centuries, in Crusader Kings 3, why are there so many Néills? Is that correct? I have never checked the family trees of the Crusader Kings since the diabolical family trees of Crusader Kings 2. But by and large, they kind of have a general correct in scope and scale, due to the way kingship worked, the way family systems work, and the period of time in which it's set. There would be thousands of O'Neills or Néills. Obviously, Niall Glundov is the O'Neill, the progeny of the O'Neill surname. But you can see on this map alone the northern Néill and the southern Néill. If they're still using the surname Néill at the time, we can't really class it as a surname, but if they're still using that as a surname in Crusader Kings, yeah, you would have tens of thousands. In the 9th, 10th centuries, the Néill power is kind of at its zenith. Like I said, for 2.5 centuries, the Néill have held this exclusive monopoly, of this kind of supreme office, and through that power sharing agreement with the Southern Néill. I say the true. I like to say that the true architect of like an island-wide dominance was the Clan Coleman king Néill Shocknall I, who ruled from 846 to 862. Even though the other previous Néill kings have claimed supremacy, Néill Shocknall actually possessed the military might to genuinely enforce it, and he's the first Néill king to march his armies all the way to the southern coast decisively defeating the kings of Munster, demanding hostages from across the island. His success is kind of unprecedented. That really, when he dies, the analysts they give him this accolade. They refer to him as Rí the king of all Ireland. And following his death, the alternating system functioned exactly as designed. Power shifted back to the north under Aid Finla, the Kinloim. And after Aid's death, it swings back to Maor Shochnall's son, Flann Sinna, who again enjoyed an incredibly long, quite a prosperous reign. He ruled for something like 37 years, from 879 to 916. And he's not only, Flann Sinna's not only a warlord, but he's a huge patron of the churches. He famously partnered with the clergy to commission, like I said, the Great Stone Cathedral at Clonmacnoise, the Cross of Scriptures. He is another king that can sort of have this sort of claim to being the High King of Ireland. But, by the mid-10th century, the system of alternating succession kind of seems to crack under the weight of sheer ambition, because the turning point came during the reign of the Northern Néill, Domhnall Néill, sometimes called Domhnall of Armagh. He ruled from 956 to 980, and Domhnall, he tried to create a highly centralized monarchy, basically to overcome economic isolation from his northern homeland. So he kind of took drastic steps of attempting to annex portions of wealthy Midland kingdoms in Meath, which is kind of the heart of the Clan Coleman allies. And this sort of aggressive expansion alienated his southern partners, leading to basically a complete breakdown of trust. And it effectively starts to destroy this long-standing cooperation between the North and the South. The last High King to rule under the traditional Néill system was the southern leader, Maor Shochnall II, who takes power in 980. Though he's a capable ruler and he famously breaks the power of Dublin, he's inherited a fractured dynasty. And because of the big divisions sown between the predecessors of the Néill, they're no longer on a united front. So it kind of leaves them highly vulnerable, which is something the whole point of what it was set up for in the first place, of this alternating kingship. And, they've relied on this because for centuries, Néill had convinced the rest of Ireland they possessed the exclusive, divinely ordained right to rule the kingship of Tara. But it was breaking down, and then enters Brian Boru, or Brian Boruma. He's the leader of the Dalcash, and they're a relatively minor dynasty in Thomond, which is modern-day County Clare, and up until the 10th century, the Dalcash have been a minor power. But basically, through military campaigning, they kind of gained the mastery of the River Shannon. Brian and his brother Muthmagon broke the power of the Owenachta first, seized the kingship of Munster, and then when Brian becomes king after Muthmagon's death, he sets out to unite all of Ireland under one native king, setting up a direct collision course for, against the reigning Néill, who is still being ruled by Maor Shochnall II. I guess what's the difference between the southern and northern Néill? Sorry if it's a dumb question. It's not a dumb question. No such thing as a dumb question. But I will say that I just want a bit of clarification on what do you mean what's the difference. Effectively, there's no difference, as we've covered in some at the start of this. There's no difference in the sense that they claim descent from the same progenitors, Niall Noglach, from different sons of Niall. They alternate the kingship in 743 between the north and the south. So they kind of project this similarity that they are the same people, same blood, same everything. So there isn't a difference, really. I would say the only difference is that the southern Néill were towards the end of their power produced far better, stronger kings. And really kind of were forced to give up the kingship for a system they'd agreed to 2 centuries earlier, when they probably could have capitalized on that and done basically what Brian Boru did. But even then, that's not to say that the Northern Néill kings were terrible, because the 9th and 10th century, 9th to 11th century, no, 10th to 11th century, you really have some major players in Irish politics. There are some huge heavy hitters, as I've named a few there, and we'll name a few more now in a minute. It's kind of a bad time to be a really good king, because everyone is a heavyweight champion. If all these kings had spaced themselves out, they would have done huge things, but they all decided to come within the same couple of centuries. Maybe it's a sign of the times. And like I said, Brian Boru rises. He's going to clash against Mick Stockton II. And basically, for a decade and a half, these two kind of superpowers clash. Several raids, naval incursions. Kind of comes to a costly stalemate. They finally meet at Clonfert in 997. They agree to formally divide the island between them, so Maelstrom would retain control of the northern half, while Brian officially recognised as the undisputed master of the southern half, including the Viking town of Dublin and Waterford. Would you say the Néills were the most powerful then overall out of all the other groups? Yes. The Oireachtas are the only other group that I would say could ever challenge the Néill effectively over a longer sustained period of time, because obviously power waxes and wanes. But they were too loose a confederation. They weren't as united in their propaganda as the Néill. Although they had good propaganda, they often would exclude smaller houses from quite important positions. They were a bit snooty about the top position. And they often relegated. The Néill relegated families too. But these families, most of the families who are relegated, with the exception of the Kilmaconnell, kind of slip away. But the families that are relegated of the Oireachtas remain, which means they must have been politically, or militarily strong, not as strong as the wider Oireachta, which kind of feels like you're hamstringing yourself. But that's just I don't know, wandering mind on my part. Yeah, but when Crusader Kings 3 is set, I think the earliest setting is the 9th century. It's kind of the zenith of Néill power in Ireland. But it's at the height. But it's in the shadows is growing the height of the Dalcash, so which sets up for the O'Briens for later campaigns. Yeah, so like I say, you can see it here in 997. Like I said, the Battle of Clonfert happens, and they agree to the Néill and the Dalcash to agree to split Ireland in half. Néill will rule the northern half. The Dalcash will rule the second half, the lower half. but it's an uneasy truce. So after they crushed Leinster and Dublin at the Battle of Glenmama in 999, Brian effectively, becomes unparalleled, with military and economic resources. So in 1002, Brian makes his move, marching his army straight to Tara, the ancient symbolic heart of the Néill power. And faced with the overwhelming threat, Néill Shotnor requested months to rally his northern Néill to his defense. However, the traditional solidarity between the two halves of the Néill had effectively collapsed, and the king of Ailech, Ed Néill, kind of refuses to assist his kinsman in the south. He effectively abandons Néill Shotnor to his fate. So, left without the support from the north, Néill Shotnor rode into Brian's camp and surrendered, handing over the kingship of Munster to the Munster kings. Right. Don't forget the ecclesiastics that didn't follow the local power structure, but they followed the hierarchy. They were still within the structure of the kingship, so they still followed the laws of the Ritua. Yes, they ruled their own areas like any other clan. They had their own system. They had their own way of sorting out kings and rulers. You had the earners, you had the corbs, you had. We mustn't forget that ecclesiastical positions were often given to sub branches of the main family. In fact, the McCarthys, who rose up to power, actually lost power early before they were McCarthys, obviously, and used their ecclesiastical position to rise back up again. These weren't separate entities. They were just another entity within the wider sphere of the Irish kingship framework. But on the ground level, they definitely ruled differently. But that's something we can explore in another video. And it's different from each church as well, because they're all, depending on which church you are and depending who you're tied to, will depend on which family you're tied to. Will depend on how much leeway you get on when you're just trying to dictate how to rule your Tua or your Tricket. No, it wouldn't be a Tricket. You'd be a Tua, Retua. So like I say, he surrenders peacefully, he hands over the kingship. Brian's obviously not content with just taking the title. He intends to enforce it across the island. So, over the next decade, he continues with that traditional military circuits. So he goes into the north. He forces the Northern Néill and Ullage kings to submit, hand over hostages. In 1005, Brian arrived in Armagh, where he is said to have laid 20 ounces of gold on the altar, and his secretary famously recorded in the Book of Armagh, Imperator Scotorum, or Emperor of the Irish, maybe with broken fingers, as Brian stood over him. By 1011, after finally subjugating the Ken O'Connell in the northwest, Brian basically achieved what no Néill had ever managed, and that was basically become the undisputed king of the United Ireland. So Brian's spectacular reign culminates obviously at the legendary Battle of Clontarf on Good Friday in 1014, where his forces are defeated in a major rebellion by the King of Leinster and Viking allies. And now, although Brian and his heir Murchad are killed in combat, he had fundamentally altered the rules of Irish politics forever by proving that the High King was not this like exclusive birthright of the Néill, but almost like a prize that could be won by anyone with the military might to take it. The rules had changed. So when Brian fell Clontarf, it briefly seemed as though like the old political order might sort of reinstate itself. Because obviously following Brian's death, suddenly Néill leader Néill II stepped back into that power vacuum and resumed the title of High King. But I think it's probably what it was. It was sort of a last gasp of the traditional system, because when Néill Shocknall died in 1022, the Néill monopoly was, effectively pronounced dead at the scene. And what can be described as the long interregnum began. Brian Boru, like I said, he changed the rules of Irish politics, and the High Kingship was no longer an arrangement alternating between the two Néill branches. It was now something that anyone could seize if you had the army to seize it. But with Néill Shocknall II's death, the Southern Néill kind of go into this sort of steady decline. They lose tracts of territory to their neighbours like the Ebro and Breffna. In the north, the Ken O'Connell are also suffering. The family who have the surname O'Neill kind of slid into obscurity for over a century. The young chiefs are often killed in local feuds, kind of leaving a vacuum, and it's later filled by the MacLaughlins. And it's the MacLaughlins who eventually kind of bring the Northern Néill back to the very pinnacle of Irish power in the late 11th century, with Donald MacLaughlin seizing the kingship of Ailech. And that's not just me, because I am a MacLaughlin fanboy when it comes to the Néill. He did. He's a ruthless and capable warlord. He monopolizes power within his immediate family, and he spends effectively decades locking horns with Murtagh Breen in Munster to kind of this bitter struggle for supremacy over the island. Donald's grandson, Murtagh MacLaughlin, he comes into power in 1145. Murtagh is another brutally effective commander. And he, through a combination of military campaigns against his neighbours, strategic alliances with Leinster, Murtagh, Murtagh kind of fought his way to the top, and by sort of the middle 1150s, Murtagh MacLaughlin, kind of achieves what no Néill had managed since Brian Boru, which was becoming another undisputed, unchallenged High King of Ireland. You could say his supreme status is kind of spectacularly displayed in 1157, when he presided over the consecration of the great Cistercian Abbey in Mellifont. He's acting as the supreme monarch of the island. But it comes to an end in 1166 when Murtagh makes a blunder, basically a political blunder, and he's blinded by his own foster son and vassal, the King of Ullage. I suppose a shocking act of tyranny destroys his credibility and it sparks a massive, widespread rebellion amongst allies and vassals. So Murtagh is killed in the uprising, completely shattering the power of MacLachlan dynasty, and the High Kingship immediately passes to the hands of his rival, the Connacht King Ruairi O'Connor. But Murtagh's death leaves the Néill deeply divided, fatally wounded, and it's right at the time when another thing happens, another thing. The Norman invasion and the end of Néill dominance. Oh, let's go. Oh, where's that gone? Doesn't McCarthy mean son of servant of Columkill or something? McCarthy comes from several names. Carthag, and Carathak or something. I can't remember them all. But it actually comes from a couple of names. It's an anglicization of several names. So not all McCarthys are the McCarthys of the Owenocta. So yeah, it's a lot of it's a lot of different branches, but they're obviously the most famous. What did the Gaels in Scotland what would the Gaels in Scotland have thought of the what would the Gaels in Scotland have thought of the Emperor of the Gaels? Yeah, because I mean, it's Imperator Scotorum, so it's comes from the Latin Scotti, so it's originally referring to all Gaelic speaking people, regardless if they live in Ireland or Scotland. So it does have that political implications. It's regarding the Gaels of Scotland. And obviously, if you're calling yourself an emperor, you kind of the understanding is of an empire, so you're requiring it's ruling over distinct nations or peoples. So Brian is asserting that he's not just an Irish king, but an emperor. So he holds supreme authority over the Irish, the Norse, or the Gaul, sorry, in Viking times, the Britons, the Gaels of Scotland. He's kind of demonstrating almost this, like, I suppose, cross-channel reach. So it's said in some sources some Scottish Gaels actually did fight as allies of Brian. We have the Mormaer in Moray, but there's an argument that he only joins because he wants to get back at the Vikings of Orkney. He's having his own political troubles with the Vikings of Orkney, who sided with Sigtrygg in Dublin. So are they there because they recognize Brian to some degree, support him to some degree, or are they there for their own interests, or are they there for both? But then again, we also know that he probably used Emperor because he's trying to bypass that traditional title of King of Ireland. Because he's an usurper, he's not actually entitled to the claim of King of Ireland. So he chooses Emperor to not be associated with the King of Ireland title, but he still needs to prove himself above it. I'm sure some historians would claim that it's his claim to of suzerainty over beyond the island of Ireland. He's including the Gaelic realm in Britain. Probably specifically the Dalriadic territories in Western Scotland. We know, obviously, at the same time, this large sort of presence of Irish in the Isle of Man. So, I suppose, it just depends on whether you think the more Mayor of Moray, whether you think other Scots fought in his camp. We don't have the records for it. It's certainly implied in the annals. But I guess it's up to your own interpretation based on that information I've given you. So yeah, just back, I was away with my computer when I heard Gael. I heard it before, but I'm not sure who's it. It's Irish Welsh or Welsh Irish. No, Gael is the Hiberno-Scandinavian, Norse, the Irish Norse Irish. The Gael is sort of kind of has a reference to the Irish Sea societies that sort of live on both sides of the Irish Sea that are part of the Gaelic world, but also slightly outside of it. They are integrated within Gaelic. They are a mix of Gaelic society and culture, along primarily with Norse. So the people of Dublin were the Gael, because they were a hybridization of Norse and Gaelic cultures, coming from mixed marriages and sharing of trade and ideas. Hi, Caveman. How we doing? I'm late. Better late than never, although we are coming to the end of this one. Yeah. So the Northern Invasion and the end of the Néill dominance. So, kind of the end of the story. It's obviously the Normans Norman and Welsh mercenaries arrive on the island in 1169 at the invitation of the exiled King of Leinster, Dermot Murrogh. The political landscape in Ireland is fundamentally altered in the last few years as we've gone through. My friend is Abercrombie. Was trying to find if he is connected to Thomas Abercrombie, who was exiled to Ireland in 1620s. Well, good luck with that. That must be hard. This is why I don't do family trees. Yeah, I'm not a fan of family trees for this specific reason. So yeah, as we sort of said, the landscape's already changed, and then King Henry II of England arrived later on after 1169 to assert his authority, grant the ancient Kingdom of Midya and Southern Néill territories to people like Baron Hugh de Lacy. The Southern Néill already are weakened by, as we stated, centuries of internal conflict and territorial losses. They've been pushed out of most of the rich plains of Meath, confined to bogs, woodlands of the southwest. And they effectively, their time as a major political power is kind of permanently extinguished. So in the north, the story of the Néill is far from over, because in 1177 you've got the Norman adventurer John de Courcy. He launches a strike into Ulster, captures Downpatrick from the Dalfeta, and he establishes the Anglo-Norman earldom of Ulster. But the Néill resist this encroachment. leaders like Eadmeath of Néill fought against the Normans. They were destroying their newly built castles and forcing the English kings and their earls to kind of uh, acknowledge their military presence. And for over a century, the Normans kind of held the eastern coast of Ulster, but their earldom kind of eventually collapses. And following the Scottish invasion led by Edward Bruce in 1315 and 1318, the assassination of the Brown Earl of Ulster in 1333, this sudden sort of power vacuum does allow the Northern Néill to launch part of the Gaelic resurgence. And it's a branch of the dynasty known as the Clanibui or Clandeboy O'Neills. They sweep eastwards and they sort of reclaim vast territories in Antrim, Down, from this crumbling Norman colony. By the late sort of 14th century, powerful Néill leaders like Niall Moore were once again sort of restyling themselves again as the kings of Ulster, and the Néill kind of maintain their independence right down to the end of the 16th century. They're acting as basically absolute monarchy masters, not monarchies, but masters of the North. But the Tudor monarchs of England finally conquer the entire island and bring it under centralized English law. Culminating at the 9 Years' War, which was 1593 to 1603. And it's the conflict led by Hugh O'Neill, the great Earl of Tyrone. And Hugh had built highly trained modern army, inflicted devastating defeats on the English, alongside the O'Donnells and Spanish allies, but they're ultimately crushed in 1601. And 1603, Hugh O'Neill formally surrenders to the English crown at Mellifont, and that brings the rebellion to an end. And obviously stripped of its traditional Gaelic authority, facing pressure from colonial administrators, and O'Neill and other leading Ulster lords board the ship in Donegal in September 1607 and flee the continent. And obviously remembered as the flight of the Earls. And the vast lands of the Néill are subsequently confiscated by the Crown for the plantation of Ulster. And that closes the book on the dynasty of the Néill. And that is where the story ends. Hang on, let me put this here so people can see that. It's very hard because the records could be in Latin, Irish, or English. It's definitely tricky. One, people forget about regional dialects like Scots and Scouse and Geordie are still around still. Yeah, and I mean, the records are fractured too. Not every person's written down in a record, so. Maybe you could say the Néill returns down the lines of descendants from Spain and Cromwell times. Yeah, but it's not part of the Gaelic order then. They wouldn't be the Néill. I mean, it's even a stretch to refer to them as the Néill in the 16th century. I take a bit of artistic liberty on that. But like I say, Gaelic Ireland is, although it sort of remains in remnants, but after the plantation of Ulster, it's systematically dismantled. And then Cromwell's invasion in 1649 kind of just, the Tudors put the final nail in the coffin, and then Oliver Cromwell buried the coffin. He put it 6 feet down and buried it. And things like, but then it just depends on how you would define. Because I mean, the language is still going strong up until 1849, whenever the Great Hunger happens. It's only with the Great Hunger that the language actually declines so rapidly. But again, I would say that it's a it'd be too much projection backwards to refer to any of the O'Neills who come back to fight, as any of the wild geese from any of the major conflicts that happen here, whether it be the Williamite Wars, the Cromwell, to refer to them as the Néill. Fermanagh forever fighting for independence from the northern Néill and later O'Neill Tyrone. Love a good underdog story. I mean, for the most part, I think they were quite content being the border region. If I'm honest with you, I think the Ebro and Breffna are the biggest threat to the Fermanagh. And the Ken O'Connell. I mean, I know the Ken O'Connell still fall under that Néill branch. But I'd say the Ebro and Breffna are probably more aggressive towards Fermanagh than the else. I kind of get the impression a lot of time that the Fermanagh is just assumed to be part of to be part of Ulster. But that's me probably thinking in blocks rather than thinking like actually in the wider scheme over centuries. I'm just thinking of specific points. Yes, I saw that, Cat. I have seen it. I obviously just haven't opened it because I realized it was a voice one and I didn't want to play it obviously on stream. But thank you, Cat. You have a lovely night, and I hope everything's okay with your wee cat. But yeah, but I mean, we've covered the Maguires before, haven't we? I think so. But I think we are going to cover the Argellan Confederacy next. Next live is 2 weeks from now, although obviously Saturday is live day, hopefully with Philip and Owen, if they make it. If they don't make it, and I have time, I will do the Argellan talk on Saturday instead to have something to present to you if Owen and Philip's calendars clash. So yeah, so I will aim for it, probably have it ready for Saturday, and then, but if Owen and Philip finally make it, then we'll do as normal, or Owen or Philip make it, we'll do something with them, and it'll be 2 weeks from today. Many fellow assist the Irish language was gone by the time the Great Hunger occurred. Drives me nuts. Still, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was mostly a second language. Or English was a second language and used for in most administrative places, but locally it was the Irish language. O'Donnell and O'Neill, but I've always wanted them to create what I call the Ulster Belt, the Confederation of Maguire, O'Reilly, McMahon, and O'Rourke. See, you don't want the O'Rourkes on your side. They're the most aggressive guys in that area. They're such an angry little group, such an angry little family. So why so angry? Honestly, read the annals. It's just constantly O'Rourke slapping the O'Farrells, slapping the Maguires, not winning all the time, but they're throwing their weight around. Rourke's aggressive. But yes, yeah, we'll do the Argellan Confederacy. So like I say, it will be this Saturday if I'm on my own, or it will be 2 weeks today. Usual time, 9 p.m. Dublin, Wednesday. So not this coming Wednesday, if anyone's listening, the Wednesday after. Either way, it will be happening soon. So it's 11 o'clock here now. I'm going to get ready for bed. Regain my voice. Thanks very much for joining, everyone. Really appreciated it. Love the questions. Great to see regular faces here. I hope to see you all on Saturday. Saturday will be going ahead on my side. So, like I say, just wait out for Owen and Philip to. The Flight of the Earls did mean to come back. They did. They did mean to come back, but unfortunately they didn't. Um, and but I think actually, Lukey said one time, or someone said, about, or was it Dennis? Dennis, so, was saying about like alternate, perspectives, like alternate histories, and we sort of did one before. It would be interesting to see what would have happened if the O'Neills had come back, or the Gales had come back. We could talk about that but I would need Owen here for that, because Owen would be the specialist on that. So, but until then, but it's definitely something we'll keep in the arsenal for something to talk about. Until then, as always, thank you so much for the support for the channel. Just liking the video, just commenting on the video when it goes live after this, and just all you just coming in and just saying hi and leaving even is just, it does the channel the world of good. So I appreciate it, and I will see you all on Saturday. So 9 p.m. Dublin time. Oh, is it 9 p.m. on Saturdays? I can't even remember. Yeah, it's 9 p.m. Saturdays. Too tired now. But until then, shalom.